The moment that changed everything happened at a dinner party, and I almost missed it entirely. I'm Ryan. 36 years old, high school history teacher, husband for 9 years, father to a 7-year-old girl named Sophie who insists on being called Captain at home and refuses to explain why. That evening in late September, I was standing in Jared and Dana's kitchen, refilling my glass with a Syrah I didn't particularly like but kept drinking anyway, when I heard Dana say something to Melissa from across the living room. "You've just been so happy lately," Dana said, the way women say things to each other that contain entire conversations inside them. "I don't know what it is." "You're glowing." Melissa laughed. The kind of laugh that's slightly too quick. "I've just been sleeping better," she said. I looked up from the bottle. Jared was standing beside Melissa, holding his own glass, and the way he didn't look at me in that moment, the precise, deliberate quality of not looking, is something I have thought about many times since. I smiled. Topped off my glass. Told myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. We had been friends with Jared and Dana for 6 years, since Melissa started doing event coordination for the County Arts Council, and Jared had sponsored one of their fundraisers through his company. They lived 3 streets over in a craftsman house with a vegetable garden Dana kept immaculate, and a garage Jared had converted into a home office. They came to Sophie's birthday parties. We watched football at their place in the fall. It was the kind of friendship that becomes infrastructure, so embedded in daily life that you stop examining it and just live inside it. Jared was the kind of man I had always trusted without thinking about it. Loud in a warm way, generous, the person who remembered your drink order and always had a story ready for a quiet moment. He'd been my friend too, or I'd thought of him that way. We watched the same sports teams, texted about them with the easy shorthand of men who don't need to explain context. I had never once looked at him and thought, this man is a risk. That's the thing about trust extended without examination. It doesn't feel like carelessness. It feels like loyalty. We drove home that night through the flat Indiana dark, Sophie asleep in her booster seat, Melissa quiet beside me in the passenger seat with her face turned slightly toward the window. The radio was on low, something forgettable. I asked her if she'd had a good time. "It was nice," she said. "Dana seemed good." I merged onto our street and said nothing else. I pulled into the driveway and carried Sophie inside while Melissa held the door, and by the time I'd settled Sophie into bed and come back downstairs, Melissa was already in the bathroom with the door half closed, and the evening folded up and ended the way evenings do. But Dana's words were still in the room with me. "You've just been so happy lately." I lay in bed that night and told myself it was a compliment, nothing more, that Melissa had been in good spirits and her friend had noticed. I told myself I was glad. I told myself I was probably the reason she was happy, in some vague, unexamined way. I had no idea I was already 3 months behind. Let me describe what our life looked like from the outside, because the outside is where I was living most of the time. Carver Falls is the kind of town where everybody knows your car. Population 40,000, one main street with a coffee shop and a hardware store and a bar that doubles as a live music venue on weekends. The college brings in temporary residents who cycle through every 4 years, but the permanent people stay permanently. Melissa and I had both grown up within 40 miles of here. We met at a mutual friend's graduation party, got married in the Methodist church she'd attended as a child, bought our house on Elm Terrace when Sophie was 2. The roots went deep. That's the word for it, roots. Which also means it's hard to move. My days had a reliable shape. I left the house at 7:10, taught 4 sections of American history to 16-year-olds who were mostly interested in their phones, came home by 4:30, picked Sophie up from after-school care on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Melissa worked irregular hours. Event coordination means evenings and weekends sometimes, weekday lulls other times. We built our schedules around that asymmetry for years. What I hadn't noticed, or hadn't let myself notice, was how the irregularity had intensified. Starting in August, 2 months before the dinner party, Melissa had been coming home later than usual on the evenings she worked. Not dramatically later. 20 minutes here, 40 minutes there. She always had an explanation. A venue walkthrough ran long, a client called after she was already in the car, traffic on Route 9 was backed up because of road construction. Each explanation was plausible. Each one arrived already complete, requiring no follow-up questions. Looking back now, that completeness was itself the signal. Real life produces incomplete explanations, partial ones, the kind that trail off because you're telling the truth and the truth is boring. Hers were always just slightly too tidy. I didn't ask follow-up questions. Not because I suspected her and was afraid, but because I had built a habit of trusting her explanations so thoroughly that questioning them felt like an insult. I had trained myself to read trust as respect. What I'd actually built was a marriage where one of us had stopped being accountable, and neither of us had noticed. Sophie noticed something, in the sideways way children do. One Saturday morning in early October, she was at the kitchen table drawing, and Melissa got a text that made her leave the room quickly. When she came back 2 minutes later, Sophie didn't look up from her drawing but said, "Mom, why do you always smile at your phone now?" Melissa laughed, and said something about a funny meme Dana had sent. Sophie accepted this and went back to her drawing. I was standing at the stove, and I heard it, and I filed it somewhere I didn't intend to open. Because what Sophie had identified in one sentence, the smile, the now, the contrast with before, was something I had been refusing to name for weeks. There was a quality to Melissa's phone interactions that had changed. The speed. The angle of her body when she read something. The way she placed the device face down on the counter in our kitchen with the same automatic gesture I'd seen at the dinner party. Something tightened in me, standing there with the spatula in my hand. I turned back to the eggs. I didn't ask. Jared texted me that same weekend about a football game. "You watching Sunday?" I said yes. We made plans for him to come over. He arrived with a six-pack and sat in my living room for 3 hours and acted completely normal. And I acted completely normal, and Melissa brought us snacks at halftime and everything looked exactly like the friendship we'd had for 6 years. Even now, that afternoon is strange to think about. The three of us in the same room. Him knowing. Her knowing. Me the only one present who was operating on a different version of reality. It's a particular kind of loneliness, I've realized since, being the last person in a room to understand what the room actually contains. November arrived cold, earlier than usual, and something in me shifted. I can't point to a single moment. It was more like the way your eyes adjust in a dark room, slowly, without any one instant of clarity, until suddenly you can see the shapes of things you couldn't see before. Melissa had a work event on a Friday evening, a fundraising gala for a nonprofit she coordinated for annually. Black tie, downtown hotel, late finish. She'd done this event before. I stayed home with Sophie, made pasta, watched a movie she'd already seen twice and wanted to see again. She fell asleep on the couch at 9. I carried her to bed and came back downstairs and sat in the quiet. Melissa had said she'd be home by 11. At 11:30 I sent a text. "You on your way?" The 3 dots appeared immediately. Then stopped. Then appeared again. Cleanup ran long. Leaving now. She came home at 12:40. I was still up, sitting in the armchair in the living room with the lamp on and a book I hadn't read a page of. She came in through the side door and stopped when she saw me. "You're up," she said. "I am." She set her bag down. She was still in her event clothes, black dress, heels in her hand, and her hair had come partly loose from where she'd pinned it. She looked beautiful. She also looked like someone who had been somewhere other than a venue cleanup. "Long night," I said. "You have no idea," she said, with a tired half-smile, and went upstairs. I sat in the chair for another 20 minutes. What I felt wasn't anger yet. It wasn't even suspicion, not in any fully formed way. It was more like the sensation of standing at the edge of something and not wanting to look down, the specific vertigo of a question you're not ready to ask. I had trusted Melissa completely for 9 years. Not because I was naive, I'd thought of myself as a careful person. But I had extended that trust the way you extend it to someone who has never given you a reason to question it, which is to say, I had never built the habit of checking. And now the habit wasn't there when I needed it. A week later, I ran into Dana at the grocery store. She was in the coffee aisle, and she looked up when I came around the corner with the particular expression people wear when they've been thinking about you and aren't prepared to see you. Just for a second, a flash of something behind her eyes. Then it resolved into warmth, and she hugged me and asked about Sophie. We talked for 5 minutes. She asked how Melissa was doing. I said fine, busy with work. Something moved across Dana's face, not guilt exactly, but a cousin of it. The look of someone who knows more than they're showing and is working to keep the surface still. She's lucky she has you, Dana said at the end, as I was turning to go. It was such a strange thing to say. Lucky she has you, present tense, waited, as if she was reminding herself as much as telling me. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it for the rest of the evening. And for the first time, I let myself think the thing I'd been stepping around for weeks. Something was happening between Melissa and Jared. I didn't know it yet as a fact. But I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes. Something in the pressure of the air, the quality of the light, the way everything feels slightly wrong without being visibly different. I needed to be sure. I want to say something about what it's like to investigate your own marriage. It doesn't feel like detective work. It doesn't feel purposeful or systematic, at least not at first. It feels like drowning in slow motion, each new piece of information pulling you slightly deeper, the surface getting further away, and you're still not sure you actually want to reach it. I started with what I had access to without doing anything I'd be ashamed of. I paid attention to the calendar on the refrigerator, the shared one Melissa and I had kept since Sophie started school, color-coded, practical. Her work events in blue. School things in green. Family in orange. I started cross-referencing her late nights against the official event calendar for the nonprofit she worked with, which was publicly posted on their website. 3 of the late nights in October and November had no corresponding events. I sat with that for 2 days before I did anything else. The next step was harder. Melissa had always had a passcode on her phone. We both did, it was just normal, and I had never once been tempted to look at it. Not because I wasn't curious, but because looking at someone's phone without permission is the kind of act that changes you regardless of what you find. You become someone who did that. I had to decide who I was. I decided to look at the phone bill instead. We shared a family plan. The account was in my name. I logged in one afternoon after school, before Melissa got home, sitting at the kitchen table with Sophie doing homework at the other end of it. The call log showed what I'd half expected and fully dreaded, Jared's number, appearing with a frequency entirely inconsistent with friendship. Multiple calls a week. Some lasting 20, 30 minutes. One on a Tuesday evening, during a window when Melissa had told me she was at a venue consultation, that lasted 47 minutes. I closed the laptop. Sophie looked up from her worksheet. Dad, what's 7 times 8? 56. I said. She wrote it down. Went back to her worksheet. I sat very still for a long time. Here's what I understood then, with a clarity that felt less like revelation and more like something settling into place. I hadn't been suspicious of Jared because I'd decided he was trustworthy. I'd decided he was trustworthy because I'd never been suspicious of him. That's not the same thing. One is judgment. The other is just the absence of looking. I'd spent 9 years being good at not looking. At letting smoothness stand in for honesty, at treating the absence of conflict as evidence of health. And now I was sitting at my own kitchen table while my daughter solved multiplication problems, and I had a phone bill in front of me that told me exactly how much that habit had cost. I called my friend Greg that evening, not a mutual friend, not anyone in the Jared and Melissa circle. Someone from college who lived in Indianapolis now, who I trusted without complication. I didn't tell him everything. I said I thought something was wrong in my marriage and I didn't know what to do. He listened without interrupting, which is what I needed. Then he said, "You need to know before you do anything. You can't have a conversation about a thing you only suspect." He was right. And wrong. but mostly right. The following Saturday, Melissa said she was taking Sophie to her mother's for the day, a regular occurrence, nothing unusual. I said I'd use the time to grade papers. I watched them back out of the driveway. Then I drove to the coffee shop on Main Street where Jared sometimes worked remotely on weekends. He was there. Laptop open, coffee at his elbow, completely at ease. He looked up when I came in and his face went through something I can only describe as a rapid recalculation, a fraction of a second where his expression reset before landing on the familiar warmth. "Hey man," he said. "Didn't know you'd be out." "Neither did I," I said. "Mind if I sit?" We sat together for 2 hours. He talked about work, about a deal his company was chasing, about the football season. He asked about Sophie. I watched him the entire time, not obviously, not accusingly. Just watched. And what I saw was a man performing friendship for someone he believed didn't know anything yet. Every laugh was a half-beat too ready. Every question about my life had the quality of deflection dressed as interest. He was very good at it. He'd had practice. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time. What I felt wasn't the hot, reactive anger I'd imagined finding. It was something colder and deeper, the particular grief of watching something you trusted reveal itself as hollow, and understanding that the hollowness had been there for a while. I chose a Thursday evening in late November. Sophie was at a sleepover at her school friend Ava's house, the first one she'd been invited to, which she'd been excited about for 2 weeks. The house was quiet in that particular way it gets when a child is absent. I cooked dinner. Not as a performance, I just needed to do something with my hands. I made the pasta Melissa liked, poured 2 glasses of wine, set the table the way we always set it. When she came home at 6:30, the smell of garlic and warm bread met her at the door. She came into the kitchen and stopped. I think she knew, in that moment, the way people know things before they know them. Something in the set of my shoulders, or the quality of the stillness. I was standing at the counter, and I turned and looked at her, and I said, "I need you to tell me what's been happening with Jared." The color changed in her face. Not drained, it did something more complicated than that. A reorganization of something, like watching a structure shift under stress. "Ryan, I've seen the phone records," I said. "I watched him last Saturday. I've been watching things for a while. I'm not asking because I don't know. I'm asking because I want to hear you say it." She set her bag down on the floor. She didn't sit. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me, and for a moment I thought she might try another explanation, one of those complete, tidy ones that required no follow-up. She didn't. "It started in August," she said. I heard the words and felt something in my chest that wasn't quite pain, more like the recognition of pain, the moment before it lands. I set down the wooden spoon I'd been holding. "How long?" 4 months. Her voice was careful. Not remorseful yet, that would come, but this wasn't remorse, this was the voice of someone choosing how much to give. "It was, I don't want to say it didn't mean anything. That's not honest. But it wasn't, I wasn't trying to leave. But you were hiding it." "Yes." "From me." "For 4 months." "Yes." I turned and looked at the pasta on the stove. I turned the burner off. The kitchen was very quiet. "Dana knows," I said. It wasn't a question. Melissa's silence confirmed it. "She's been watching me at dinner parties and grocery stores while knowing this. I'm sorry. Does Jared think this is going to continue?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I ended it 2 weeks ago. It became something I didn't want anymore. I thought if it ended I could just..." She stopped. "You thought you could just go back," I said. "And I would never know. Because I never look." She didn't answer. But she didn't deny it. And there it was. Not a confession born of conscience, an ending born of inconvenience. She had measured the exit and decided to return without paying the toll. She had counted on my habitual trust, my trained-in curiosity, the 9 years of smooth surfaces. She had calculated the odds and decided she was safe. What I felt then was something I hadn't expected, not rage, not even deep grief. A kind of exhausted clarity. Like a fog lifting not into sunshine but into cold, flat, honest light. "I'm not going to throw things," I said. "I'm not going to yell. But I need you to understand something." I looked at her directly. I tried, while I was figuring this out, to imagine a version of this where I could get past it. Where I tried to forgive and we rebuilt something. I really tried to find that version. She looked at me. Waiting. "I can't find it," I said. "I know that might change. I know maybe in 6 months I'll feel differently. But right now, the lies, the months, using Jared's friendship as cover, Dana knowing, you calculating that I'd never check, I can't look at that and find a door back in." Her eyes filled. "Ryan, I know you know," I said. "I believe that you're sorry. That's not the problem." I paused. "The problem is I keep asking myself, if it had been working, if Jared had wanted to continue, would you have told me? And I don't think you would have." She didn't answer. That silence was its own answer. We stood in the kitchen for a long time. The pasta was cooling on the stove. The wine sat untouched. Outside, the November dark pressed against the window, and the house on Elm Terrace, 9 years of it, sat around us with all its accumulated weight. "I'll stay at Greg's," I said. "We need to figure out Sophie." I'm writing this from a different address now. It took 6 months to close everything down properly: the legal process, the house, the custody arrangement. Sophie splits her time, and we've worked hard to keep that as clean as possible, because she's 7 and she named herself captain, and she deserves to have the stable ground under her feet even when the ground under ours shifted. Melissa and I communicate about Sophie with a careful, civil efficiency that neither of us has turned into more than that. Some things you can coexist around without rebuilding. I've accepted that. Jared and Dana's marriage didn't survive either. That came out gradually, as these things do in small towns, not dramatically, not publicly, just a quiet dissolution that people started knowing about in February and stopped pretending not to know about by April. I don't feel satisfaction about that. I don't feel much about it at all, which I think is its own kind of progress. What I've spent more time thinking about is the failure mode. Not hers, mine. The version of trust one had practiced in that marriage was really just the absence of attention. I had confused not doubting with genuinely knowing. I had let a relationship run on autopilot for long enough that I'd lost fluency in its actual state, and by the time I started paying real attention, I was already working from months-old information. That isn't love. Or rather, it might be love, but it isn't partnership. Partnership requires you to keep looking, even when you're sure of what you'll find. Especially then. Sophie asked me once, about 3 months after Melissa and I separated, whether our house would feel different now. We were driving back from her mother's, a Sunday evening, the flat Indiana landscape going past in the early dark. "Which house?" I asked. "Both of them," she said. I thought about that. "Probably," I said. "But different doesn't always mean worse." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My friend Ava's parents got divorced, and then they both got nicer." I laughed. The first real, unguarded laugh I'd had in a while. "That's a good outcome," I said. "I thought so too," she said, matter-of-factly, and looked out the window. I drove through the November dark toward a house that held her room, her drawings, her soccer cleats, and the version of her life I was going to spend the next decade protecting. That felt like enough. It felt, actually, like more than enough. I didn't look back. What's most revealing about this story isn't the affair itself, it's the environment that made it possible to sustain for 4 months without detection. Ryan extended trust the way someone might leave a door unlocked because they live in a safe neighborhood. Not careless, exactly, contextually reasonable. But trust without any mechanism of verification isn't really trust. It's assumption. And Melissa, whether consciously or not, had learned over 9 years that Ryan's assumptions were reliable. He didn't look. He'd never had reason to. So when she started making choices that required him not to look, the habit was already in place. What makes Jared's role in this story particularly damaging isn't the act of betrayal itself, but the normalization effect it created. Jared was someone Ryan trusted, someone embedded in their shared life, someone who sat in Ryan's living room and drank his beer and asked about his daughter while conducting an affair with his wife. That's not just betrayal, it's a restructuring of the entire social world. After something like that, you don't just lose a marriage. You lose the version of reality that made the marriage feel secure. Every shared memory with Jared retroactively becomes contaminated. The football Sundays, the fundraiser dinners, the texts about sports, all of it rewritten as performance. Dana's position in the story deserves attention too. She knew, and she stayed silent. Her comment at the grocery store, "She's lucky she has you," wasn't an accident. It was the guilt finding a small release valve. She couldn't tell Ryan and she couldn't fully conceal knowing, so she said something that planted a seed without bearing the cost of honesty. That kind of indirect complicity is almost more damaging than direct involvement. It makes the betrayed person feel they were surrounded by a system designed to keep them uninformed. Melissa's choice to end the affair and say nothing is the story's true moral pivot. She made a calculation. She decided that the relationship with Ryan was worth preserving, that he wouldn't find out, that she could absorb the damage privately and move forward without the confrontation. What she underestimated was the cost of that calculation to Ryan's sense of himself. Not his ego, his epistemology. His understanding of what was real in his own life. When he told her, "I can't find the door back in," he wasn't punishing her. He was accurately describing what had been lost, not the fidelity, but the foundation. Failed forgiveness stories are often told as weakness, as the inability to move past pain. But there's another reading. Sometimes the inability to forgive isn't about the wound itself, it's about the specific shape of the deception. Ryan could have potentially rebuilt trust after an admission. What he couldn't rebuild after was the discovery that she had counted on him not to notice. That changes what the marriage was. Not what it had been, what it currently was, in that moment, when the full picture became visible. He left not from anger, but from accuracy. What I keep coming back to is Dana's line at the grocery store. "She's lucky she has you," said to a man she was actively helping deceive by staying silent. That's the detail that cuts deepest, I think, not the affair, not even the lying. It's the way people on the edges of betrayal tell themselves they're neutral when they're not. They're just less visible. If you've ever had someone in your life who smiled at you warmly while knowing something painful about your situation, you understand what Ryan felt in that grocery store. That particular chill of retrospective recognition. The question worth sitting with isn't how could she do it? It's what kind of trust are you building, and does it require you to stop looking?